Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to HR.com's Institute for Human Resources webcast, Onboarding Executives, Grasping the Opportunity to Move Senior Teams Forward. My name is Jennifer Overbo, and I'm the Myers-Briggs Product Manager for CPT. We are the exclusive publisher of the Myers-Briggs Assessment and provider of global solutions for leadership and professional development, team building, conflict management, and retention. I'll be moderating today's webcast, and we'll be introducing our featured speaker, Pam Fox Rollin, in just a moment. This webcast will explore the challenges and opportunities inherent in onboarding executives and guide you through leadership team strategies that support onboarding. During this session, you'll learn about challenges and opportunities for executive teams in transition. You'll gain 3 strategies for strengthening leadership team effectiveness while onboarding new executives. And we'll present some tools that support high-value conversations with your new and transitioning leaders. Today's webinar will run for approximately 1 hour, and please remember that the last 10 to 15 minutes we'll reserve for Q&A. So go ahead during the presentation as you think of questions, submit them to me using the questions function in the GoToWebinar controls. Now I'd like to introduce our featured speaker. I'm very excited to welcome Pam Fox Rollin, executive coach and consultant to executives and leadership teams in Silicon Valley and beyond. She works with executives through director levels in technology, consulting, healthcare, as well as NGOs. Pam guides executives to make differences productive and onboard new leaders successfully. Pam's idea-shaped clients have included Blue Shield of California, eBay, LinkedIn, Charles Schwab, Verizon, and a variety of mid-sized companies. Pam is frequently invited to speak on onboarding, executive team effectiveness, and her research into leadership across the personality types. She is a featured lecturer and coach for executive education at business schools, and she's also the author of 42 Rules for Your New Leadership Role, the manual they didn't hand you when you made VP, director, or manager, which recently became a top-selling book in training and coaching. Please join me in welcoming Pam. And now I'd like to turn the webinar over to you, Pam. Welcome.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. Glad you're here. When you watch how leaders act as they start, you might notice a pattern. I call it the myth of the start. I find this pattern appears for executives as well as for more junior leaders. Most new leaders, whether promoted or hired in, act as if they hold these 4 expectations. First, the people around me will know I'm coming, why I was hired, and will on the whole be glad I'm here. Second, there's something I'm expected to accomplish. These objectives will be provided, and people around me will know and support these objectives. Third, when they said I was selected because with my strong background in, say, global, I could help the company go international, that meant that the executive team had already decided the company will go international. Finally, leaders across the organization support and are paving the path for my major initiative. Note that new leaders may not actually hold these beliefs if you ask them, but often they act as though these are true. And how about those who recruit or onboard new leaders? Do the actions they take dispel or reinforce this myth? When you've seen the executive team go back and forth on whether to expand internationally, have you also heard your leaders say to the new hire, "Sure, there will be challenges going global, but this is important to us and we'll back you"? Do you suspect they mean, "No one here is ready to roll that boulder uphill and we're glad you're game to try"? So what happens when new leaders act on this myth of organizational preparation? And when we in the organization do nothing to dispel the myth, let alone lay significant groundwork for their start? Usually the executive is unprepared. The stats I've seen are that 1/4 of senior executives promoted from within fail in the first 18 months. 1/3 of outside hires fail. And for the 60 to 75% of leaders who survive into the second year, their effectiveness and trajectory are powerfully affected by choices they made as they started. Their teams are unprepared. And if the new leader is part of a senior leadership team, our focus for today, that team is again thrown off by having to focus on the possibility of failure in a critical role and then a change in senior team membership. Let's see what we can do to turn this around. HR.com, please put up poll number 1. So let's see who's here. Pick one of these that best matches your role. It might not match it exactly, but find one that best matches and click on it. So responses are coming in. Just click on the box that best represents your role. So they're coming in, and in just a moment, HR.com is going to close the poll. Giving it just another moment. Okay, so we have 44% are HR business partners, generalists, or some similar role. 25%, 24% OD or leadership development. 16% executive coaches, internal or external. 9% recruiters, and 7% executives. Great. So each of you can make a difference to this situation, even if you're several steps away from your senior leadership team. I invite you to consider that this is possible, and I will show you some ways to go for it. We'll start by seeing the opportunity to improve senior team effectiveness while we improve executive onboarding. Then we'll look at 3 levers I found powerful for accomplishing this: owning the change agenda, forging personal partnerships, and raising senior team decision quality. When I say senior teams, for today's purpose, I mean the group of cross-functional or cross-unit leaders that make critical decisions for the company or business unit, or advise the CEO or BU head to make those decisions. Finally, we'll see what you can do to make this happen. So what if onboarding your next executive strengthened your senior team? Here's an example I'll use throughout. Let me introduce you to TS Inc., a technology services company I worked with many years ago. As with each of the cases I use today, this is a real company with a few details changed. I came to the company at the invitation of the new COO to help her build her team. It didn't take long for us to realize that her mandate to scale was only partially shared by the senior team. There was a second executive hire while I was there, an SVP of sales and marketing. And when he saw the dissension at the top, his reaction was to move off the executive floor and spend lots of time out in the field. The COO insisted that the CEO convene the senior team and make critical decisions. Soon I was brought in to help them have those conversations. We identified together that they had no common perspective on what they might actually do together as a senior leadership team. Well, what do effective senior leadership teams do? From my reading of the research and 20 years of executive coaching and consulting, effective senior leadership teams do these 3 things. They coordinate to ensure the most critical change initiatives are designed and executed for success. They ensure decision makers have the information, insight, support that they need to make decisions, and they forge top-level partnerships across units, which we know means across people. We'll be looking at how to strengthen these while you're onboarding the executive. We'll start by talking about senior team ownership of the change agenda. Then I address the third, partnerships, before decision making, as the seeds for strong partnerships are often sown even before the executive is hired. In the case of this technology services executive team, they needed to take on scalability as a major coordinated change initiative. They needed to communicate across functional silos. And they needed to develop the one-to-one relationships that make these tough conversations easier and more productive. What does this take? Well, we often talk about the right people, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Teams also need focus. That means commitment, daring, compelling commitment to what they're doing together to lead the enterprise forward. Teams also need time together, and senior teams rarely give themselves enough time. Finally, they benefit from improving their skills and processes to have those conversations. So who are these right people and what do they do? First, they enable the overall success of the organization by making the senior leadership team effective. They ensure their own function or business unit delivers, and they collaborate with peers to enable all units to deliver. Something that struck a chord from my new book, 42 Rules for Your New Leadership Role, is where I say, if you plan to show up and do your best, you're still thinking like an individual contributor. The executive corollary is, If you plan to show up and focus on your function, you're still thinking like a manager, not a senior leader. So what does it take to be a great senior leader? There are many lists of what it takes. I'm sure you've seen them. The best research I've seen comes from the Hay Group and is captured in the book titled Appropriately Senior Leadership Team. That research confirms the first 4 items above. Someone who acts from the perspective they are least responsible for the success of the overall enterprise as for their own function or business unit. Someone who has the intellectual chops to make decisions amid extraordinary complexity. Someone with integrity, defined very usefully in this research as putting issues on the table, even when the outcome could be negative for oneself or one's unit, keeping confidences, matching actions with their words, and holding the team collectively accountable for doing the same. And empathy, here defined as the ability to understand the content of what someone has said and the meaning it holds for them, so they can accurately represent someone else's views. I add from related research and my observations what's called self-monitoring, the ability to be aware of one's intent and actions, notice the consequences of those actions, and adjust their behavior when needed to be more effective. We can, on another webinar perhaps, look at what the research and our own experience shows about how readily executives can develop these 5 capacities. The CPI 260, an assessment we'll mention, can help identify growth needed on many of these aspects. For now, let's say that I've seen some success at developing each of these in some people. Certainly, it's easier to hire for people who already do this than developing these while the executive is onboarding. The element most readily developed during onboarding is the first, helping the executive make the transition from focusing primarily on the success of their unit to taking an enterprise perspective. Often during onboarding, as was the case with the technology services example, we find the whole senior leadership team needs to step up to an enterprise perspective. So now we know what senior leadership teams do and what it takes from them and the individual executive. If we could just get the team functioning and then hire the right executives, we'd be set, right? Transplants, whether we're talking livers or executives, are tough. Organizations act as if they have immune systems that reject transplants. With external hires, we hire for fresh thinking and then we reject the thinker. With internal promotes, we want them to step up and then we talk them down when their new actions seem inconsistent with their old actions. With liver transplants, we can give drugs to improve transplant acceptance. With leader transplants, we turn to drugs only as last resort. The crucial level for making this transplant stick is a senior team that is ready or at least willing to do what it takes to make onboarding successful. Without this attention, what usually happens is the new executive is swallowed by the concerns of their own unit. They're waiting for this executive to come in and take on all the decisions that they deferred making. The person walks in and their email box is full, their voicemail box is full, they haven't even started. Cross-functional partners are not brought in on initiatives, and the senior team hasn't equipped themselves with the time and sometimes the skill to identify, address, and resolve the issues that impact these major initiatives the new executive is expected to lead forward. So the executive is considered ineffective, the initiatives are ineffective, and the senior team again lacks the stability to do its own work. Here's what we want to make happen instead. Initiatives led by the new leader are sponsored by the senior team, and the team is strengthened in the process. New executives are onboarded as fully to the senior team as to their own unit. Partnerships are forged or improved between peers who will need to collaborate. So what can we do when onboarding executives to help them and the team? At Technology Services, Inc., both the new COO and SVP of Sales were brought into a team that hadn't really embraced scalability as anything more than a goal. The senior team had yet to commit itself as a group to doing what it takes to scale. So here we have the COO with a mission to scale and a new SVP of sales aligned with that mission. And their challenge is to actually coordinate their actions to deliver on customer promises. We have a CTO who insists the technology scales, but the COO doesn't see it. We have a CFO that doesn't want to authorize investments needed to scale. And a CEO who says, yes, go scale. We don't need to talk about it, just go do it. What does it mean for a senior team to own the change agenda? It means laying the groundwork, describing the vision, scope, what we're doing. Typically, we save how for later, as research and our experience shows that new groups seldom know how they're going to be able to accomplish something right at the beginning. We surface conflict to clarify key issues, and we'll talk a bit about the TKI, one of my favorite tools for accomplishing this. And we ask the team to charter the change, to clarify what they're committed to include candidates as much as possible in frank conversation about where they are in the change agenda, and to hire for change leadership capabilities as well as for functional excellence. So let's look at a health plan that did this well. Their aim was to move from functional organization to customer teams. There was a new head of sales charged with doing this realignment. It was accomplished on time, on budget, with union partnership, which surprised many of the people involved. And the cross-functional interdependencies were handled well. It worked because, first and foremost, the senior team chartered the purpose of the change. And sales VP candidates were considered with this change in mind. The cross-functional issues were acknowledged up front, and they had the support for success. This CEO and COO knew what they were doing, and they guided the process. The senior team made time and arranged professional facilitation. I worked intensely with that team for 6 months. And HR, OD, and LD were fully engaged at all levels. Now let's look at the second strategy for doing this. Get team members in contact with each other. If you're familiar with Myers-Briggs type, those 4-letter codes you see on this slide, you may already be anticipating potential dynamics on this team. We have both the CEO and new COO as INTJs, forward-thinking, visionary, introverted leaders, driving towards what they see as the future state, and quite willing to go it alone if they have to. We have the CFO, ESTJ, who wants his plans buttoned up, wants growth predictable with as little mess as possible. We have the INTP Chief Technology Officer, who in this case had neither the skills nor the intention to collaborate. And the lone ESFP Head of Marketing, who wanted to be where exciting, positive conversations were happening. And there were not many exciting conversations happening on the executive floor. So let's help leaders form personal partnerships. Encourage one-to-one connections. Set new hires up early, especially with the executives they didn't meet or work with as part of the interviewing process. Invite internal promotes to make time with new peers. Internal promotes, ironically, are often at a disadvantage in building executive partnerships because they tend not to have had as many conversations in the recruiting process as external executives have had. Build an understanding of each other's motivations and drive. Arrange senior team time for who we are and what we care about. And if this seems all like talky fluff to your executive team, you can show them the research that when people make the time, even a couple hours, to get to know who they are as people, they do better together on challenging tasks for months to come. Do the Myers-Briggs assessment. It's an excellent springboard for conversation, absolutely my favorite tool. And coach new hires on strengths and stretches. The CPI 260 can help you with the selection of a new senior leader. And then the same assessment can be used throughout the life cycle of the leader as a development tool for strengths and stretches. Another company I worked with used this approach with success. It was an investment company that had a pretty poor record of bringing in people from the outside. These executives had been there for a very long time. They knew and trusted each other, and the transplants just didn't take. So this time, they did a consult to hire. They acknowledged the relationship gap, and they made real effort. And I did with them a series of team buildings that reached across the organization. HR really diagnosed the situation and recommended this consult to hire path. Existing leaders took advantage of coaching. And had they not invested, they would have just plopped another new executive into the organization and decried yet another failure. Instead, the existing leaders of this company this time took responsibility for making the new hire and themselves successful. Now let's look back at our friends at TS Inc. In the name of autonomy and efficiency, they were sub-optimizing decisions all over the place. What was missing for them was understanding the business case for coordinated decision-making, and in some cases, the skill level to make this work. For example, I arranged a communications coaching specialist to work with that CTO so he could participate in decision-making conversations. Again, for those who are familiar with Myers-Briggs, we've got the COO wanting systematic decisions, the SVP pushing for fast decisions, the CFO wanting to work together bit by bit, step by step, and a CEO who holds his plan very close to the vest. What helps teams improve decision quality? First, show the opportunity. As analytical as your executives are, they seldom analyze the quality of the decisions they make together over time. So put together a decision record. Look at the speed of decisions and the backlog of decisions they've yet to gather to make. Bring them stakeholder views. Build the case, find some allies. Make it easier. They know how they make decisions one-on-one, but most of them aren't tremendously skilled in how to make decisions as a group. So you can give them some tools and methodology. You can advocate for clarity. And you can help them address the human side of the decision-making. A lot of you, I am sure, have the background and roles and expertise to really be able to help them navigate some of the thorny issues that get triggered when people are making decisions. Issues come up about status and control. You can also help individuals develop the skills to participate fully and well. So here's a team that really did this well. This was right after a merger, and that created the context for a restart. There was a terrific division head who, along with two new executives, built the support for changes. They created new norms that strengthened decision-making. What got them going on this was a graphic showing that decision velocity was increasing. They were going to need to make more and more decisions over time. The senior team took the time to envision how they'd like to operate, and they made the time. For this group, skill wasn't an issue, but time sure was. They had broad support from HR in hiring, training, and coaching, and they facilitated a series of leadership team offsites for them, and they actually asked for more. They wanted to make sure for the first 6 months of their time together that they were supported in these new behaviors so that they really could institutionalize this way of working together. All right, this is where you step in. You can have a positive impact on this. If you're working with the senior team directly or coaching one of the executives, you have their ear. Paint the picture of how this onboarding can be different, address their pain points, and challenge them to make the senior team more effective in the process. If your steps were moved, you'll have to work more creatively, and you know how to do that. You plant seeds, you spot opportunities, you offer examples, and you build skills. Before the new executives start, help the leadership team map and sponsor the change agenda so they know where are they in the process of that change and what skills will they need to make sure that the new hire has to be successful in executing the change agenda while they're onboarding. Partner with hiring executives and recruiters to set expectations accurately. Arrange support for executive team development and frankly, arrange time. Just go block time on their calendar. Very important meeting chartered by CEO. Because as positive an intention as you can have for creating the time for this, if you've got a senior leader who is going to be in Europe for a couple weeks and the other person that they're working with is in Japan and the other person is blocked out with a financial review, et cetera, it's just not going to work. So you've got to block time in executive calendars early and facilitate upgrades in critical aspects of how the senior team functions. Conflict management is one place I typically find very fruitful to start. First quarter of that new hire, ensure the overall effectiveness of their onboarding, facilitate those one-to-one partnerships we talked about, and prepare the next round of leadership team development. And now you're engaged, you're focused, you'll figure out what to do. HR.com, please put up our second poll. So let's pool our knowledge. What resources have you used with executives and senior teams? And unlike the last one, you can just check all of these, whichever ones you've used. And feel free to put in the comments any particular assessments that you like to use. We'll give this another 20 seconds or so. Okay, answers are coming in. All right, HR.com, it looks like you can go ahead and close the poll. So 3/4 of you use the Myers-Briggs assessment. 22% use the TKI. That's even higher than I expected, and I hope you have found it just as useful as I have. Just a couple of you who've used the CPI 260 assessment. Many of you, almost just past 2/3, have used other 360s. All right. And thank you, 1/4 of you have noted in comments what other assessments you use. So let's just look at 3 of the ones that I like to use that are provided through CPP. First, the Myers-Briggs. I have been studying and using the Myers-Briggs literally for 28 years since I was a teenager. And I can tell you this tool is horribly underused. It's a fabulous tool. You can use it in many ways, in many places. And I would bet about 75% that use the Myers-Briggs that for many, it's just used in an introductory team building workshop. You can make so much more of this tool. Use it to engage change sponsors, to diagnose and improve partnerships, to strengthen decision making. And there are booklets for all of these topics. Some of my favorites are Introduction to Type in Teams, Type in Leadership, Change, and Decision Making. The TKI, Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument, is a simple, powerful map of our preferred approaches to conflict. It's an excellent tool for improving team decision quality. And it plays very well with senior teams. The CPI 260 comes in where Myers-Briggs cannot or should not, such as hiring, or where you want an executive to see clearly and simply their strengths and stretches. The report does a great job of establishing an agenda for coaching. You can use it with members of senior teams to see where their strengths and stretches overlap and to support individuals in their development. If you have questions about any of these or about how to use them, again, feel free to go ahead and put those in comments, and we're cataloging them, and in just a little bit, we'll be taking your questions and answering them as many as we can on the call. So recommended reading. I want to recommend some booklets and books I've used to raise my game in coaching new executives and senior teams. First, Introduction to Type in Leadership, a terrific booklet from my research partner, Sharon Richmond, who is now head of Cisco's Change Leadership Center of Excellence. This book will challenge your notion of what leaders look like. You'll see how leaders come from every MBTI type and how you can help them grow. I use this book with executives to challenge the tendency for them to hire and value people who come across like they do. I say one of the hallmarks of a great leader is to see leaders everywhere, and this booklet helps you do that. Introduction to Type and Decision Making will help you diagnose for your executive team or any team their decision making. The Introduction to Conflict and Team stands out as a great resource. I call it the Yellow Book. I use it frequently with my clients. 2 books I'd recommend for you. Senior Leadership Teams is co-written by the Hay Group and Professors Wageman and Hackman. And Hackman has done really groundbreaking research on teams. What makes this book indispensable to me is the quality of the research base underlying their findings. Finally, I'm glad to introduce you to my new book, 42 Rules for Your New Leadership Role, the manual they didn't hand you when you made VP, Director, or Manager. It's a practical, readable, yet research-based guide to making a strong start. A manufacturing CEO who read the book called it the essential pocket guide for leaders. You can find this on Amazon or on my ideashape.com website. So where do you start? You can identify the next executive onboarding opportunity. And this is going to look different whether you're an executive who maybe is doing a hire of somebody who's on a senior team and can flag this early. By flagging it early, you can start doing some of the senior teamwork that we've talked about in this, helping them work on their processes for conflict and decisions. If you're a recruiter, you know it's coming up, and you can ask the questions of the people who are bringing you roles and say, where are you in the, in these couple things, the change agendas, and where are you in this? What do you need from this hire to be successful in making the kind of changes across the organization that you aim to make? Second, outline the opportunities and risks. It may seem obvious what's at stake, but often people are so busy and so focused on current to-dos that they just miss what is really at stake with making this hire a great start. Find a senior team ally and paint the picture. Help them see what they could be doing, what part of this agenda that I've outlined they could embrace. Take an inventory of what's compelling to senior team members. What would make working on their own processes and hiring this next executive well, what would make that compelling to each of them? Develop some high potential to-dos, whether that is a team building, individual coaching for members of the executive team who have trouble contributing to collaborative decisions. Encourage senior team to agenda discussion. That means make time on the calendars for how to advance the success of the team. And support the team in taking the next step. Now I'm passing over to Jennifer Overbo from CPP, who will outline certifications and get us going on Q&A.
Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Pam. I just wanted to briefly go over the fact that CPP does offer certification programs for those who are interested in using our assessments, in particular the MBTI assessment and the CPI 260. Both require either educational eligibility or somebody to have completed our certification programs. And in those programs, individuals will get everything they need to learn how to ethically administer the assessment, to roll them out within the organization, to interpret the results effectively and appropriately for different applications. These are public programs. We do offer them nationwide. We also have in-house delivery available for those organizations who'd like to pursue that route. And the nice thing about both is that you do qualify for CEUs with several professional organizations. If you want more information, you can visit the links that we are referencing in the slide. And the TKI assessment does not require certification. So those of you who are using that already know, and those who are interested can simply contact CPP for more information. So I want to say that we've received many, many questions thus far. And I'd like to go ahead and begin giving Pam the opportunity to respond to them. Pam, would you like to say anything further before we get started?
No, go ahead, Jennifer.
Okay, so this is a popular question. Would you postpone a crucial hire to develop the senior team first?
Oh, this is a classic chicken and egg, right? I'm sure many of been involved in the postponement of a senior team building, to wait until we have that new CFO, COO, somebody on board. And then what happens? So that person comes on, but somebody else is gone. So then we're going to wait for the next person and the next person. It's like that old Dilbert cartoon about waiting for people to go to lunch, and you wind up never going to lunch. So there are just, there's no perfect time. And so I think often the perfect time is now with the people you have. And if they become more skilled, the new people will see skills and be able to interact with the team at a higher level because the team's already functioning better. So I'd say go ahead and do it.
Great. Another question that we've received, do you use these assessments with individual executives or the senior team as a whole?
Both. So it depends. And typically when I do Myers-Briggs work with senior teams, I will work with the individuals as well as the group. Often I will meet with each individual first, then we'll work together as a group, learn or deepen the learnings on the Myers-Briggs model, help see who we are as a team together, have it shed light on some of our dynamics and opportunities, and then I'll go back and meet individually with the senior team members again to help hear what it was that they learned from that, what they're taking away, if there's other things that they could be doing to be more effective with other members of the senior team. So with some of the other instruments, with TKI, often do it together as a group. If I've got an executive who I'm coaching who struggles with conflict from whatever their typical style is for dealing with it, if that's something that comes up frequently for them, we'll work on it together, just one-on-one. But when I do it with a team, I like to have everybody in the team involved. It really creates a lot of understanding. It depersonalizes it in a way, and that's something that many of these assessments are just so useful for. It's like, oh, okay, you're not avoiding me as a person, you're avoiding the conflict. Is that a good decision for the conflict? And one of the things Carl Spetzler talks about, he's the CEO of Strategic Decisions Group and a long-time Myers-Briggs fan. And what he says is we tend to drag decisions into our own comfort zone rather than the appropriate zone of the problem. So if this is an issue that we really need to collaborate on, sometimes we'll avoid it or we'll get competitive about it simply because that's our own preference. So when we do these assessments with the group, then we can see, oh, okay, these are where our own comfort zones are, and now let's see, what does this particular decision in front of us demand from us? Is it something that individuals can just go do on their own? Do we need the best proposal to win, or is this something we can do collaboratively?
Great. Okay, so I'm going to, another popular question it looks like is, if you could provide or expand upon your top transplanting tips. I've seen that question asked in a variety of different ways, so I'm just going to simplify it for you. Your top tips.
So I think it's about building understanding. And it goes back to this idea of the change agenda being owned by the senior team. Sometimes we want this new executive to bring fresh energy to the organization and drive us to accomplish milestones more rapidly. So they hire somebody who has a track record of doing that and plop them into the organization that makes decisions slowly and tends not to embrace fresh thinking. And they think that that one person, because of the tremendous success record and energy, is going to be able to transform the organization. And they just run smack into that organizational immunity. So really, I encourage senior teams to start with themselves and say, okay, if we truly want to become an organization that makes decisions more rapidly, is more market-facing, is more data-driven, whatever the challenge is, that we decide what is that going to look like. And we may say, we don't know exactly how to do it. That's why we're going to hire somebody who really knows how to do it. But we are going to, to at least acknowledge that we need to step up to let that person be successful. If we continue to do it in the same way we've done it before, then no matter how great that person is at whatever change we've asked them to make, it's just not going to take root in our organization.
Great. Pam, can you please repeat or go into a little bit more detail about the 4 myths of the start that you talked about at the very beginning of the presentation? If you could revisit those 4 myths.
Okay, so this is myths about what leaders believe or act as if they believe when they start in a role. First, people know I'm coming. I mean, just that simple. People know I'm coming. Of course, I'm a new SVP of something. People know I'm coming. Not necessarily. They may have missed that memo. They know why I was hired. Not necessarily. And they'll be on the whole glad I'm here. Oh, not necessarily. So people may be glad that somebody's finally in that role to get things done. But they may be very, very concerned about what you're going to do. And we tend to think that only the marginal performers are fearful when a new leader starts. In my experience, most everyone is. And especially some of those bright but miscast players tend to be at risk to leave because they don't know how their career is going to be guided by this new person. It's been challenging enough with the other person. Then in comes this new person, and they have to sort of re-explain themselves all over again and prove themselves all over again. And it's just very, it's a very uncertain time. And our brains like certainty, and this isn't it. So people tend to get tremendously nervous. I would say not to mistake that nervousness for incompetence or negative attitude about work. Expect that people are going to be nervous and a little grumpy and suspicious, and don't take that as a sign of their competence. Typically, you'll find in a few months that your best performers are going to come around and be really glad you're there. Secondly, there's something I'm expected to accomplish, and I'll know about that, and other people will know about that. Not necessarily. Often you were hired because there's some vacuum in the organization. People don't know how to do what you know how to do, or the person who knew how to do it left 6 months ago, and they've been kind of limping along since then, or they don't want to do it the way that the person who was last in the role did it. So you are going to have to define what it is you're aiming to accomplish, and if necessary, go renegotiate that with your senior team and board. Third, that when they say you were selected because of a particular background, that it means that they really want to take advantage of that. And that's the dynamic we were just talking about a few minutes ago, where the change agenda was not really owned by the senior team yet. And finally, the leaders across the organization are paving the path for these initiatives. They're busy with their own stuff. They may, if they remember that you are going to help them go international, they may just be hoping you do it, as painlessly as possible for them. Are they preparing their organization to work with your team to make that happen? I wouldn't count on it. So it's just a question of really checking your assumptions and finding out what the situation really is so that you know how much of the change agenda as a new executive you need to take on.
Okay, great. I have another top 3 question, Pam, and that is if you could isolate the top mistakes that an executive team makes when they are onboarding a new member.
I think we've gone through some of them. Not being frank about where the change agendas are, to me, is just number one, Jennifer. And it's not, necessarily, it's not evil. It's just that they may not know themselves if they haven't had really frank conversations with the senior team. So the CEO thinks that the change agenda has been embraced, but if you go talk to the CFO, you'll discover that it has not. So that, I think, is probably the biggest.
And we have several questions here, Pam, that really are around decision making. And one in particular jumps out to me. It's what recommendations would you have for analysis paralysis?
Yeah. You know, people are concerned about analysis paralysis, and I understand that. I find that that is true sometimes about the initiatives, especially the big bets that people want to take on. And there's a great book by, I think, Rowan Ashkenaz called Rapid Results about prototyping. There's a lot of good books out there about, you know, really piloting changes that you want to make so that you're not spending 6 months analyzing them. You're spending, you know, 2-3 months actually doing them and learning from that. What I find that senior teams tend to be less analytical about is themselves and their own processes. So I think if you can help senior teams actually focus on themselves and turn that analytical capability that they have so abundantly onto how to improve their own decision making, that it's really going to pay off.
There's a few questions about 360. So can you talk a little bit more about your use of 360 tools for performance review and how effective you find them to be?
Sure. First, we probably want to distinguish between performance reviews and development. Sometimes the same 360 is used for both. Sometimes they're used for one or the other. I'm going to talk actually about for development because I think that's the context of what we're talking about here. So I do use 360s, and the sort of 360 I use varies tremendously. For some organizations, they have their own leadership competency models, and they design an online-based 360 with multiple stakeholders, lots of questions. Others contract out for that, so I've worked with that sort of process. I also do custom 360s where I'll go interview people in the executives world and summarize themes back to them and help them make decisions about what they're going to commit to changing. Regardless of the tools you use and the format for it, what I've seen in 360s is the most important thing is the conversation with the executive about what it means to them and what they're going to do about it. And that's the part of the process that sometimes is forgotten, especially when you do big level-wide 360s. You have all of your VPs do 360s, and tons of people are filling out bubbles and checking boxes. And then people get this numerical score, and they look at the top couple, and more importantly, they look at the bottom couple, and they say, oh, okay, well, I'm doing okay relative to this, and I'm doing not okay relative to that. And I find that that is just missing the potential of the process. However you decide to gather the data, make sure that the executive has the opportunity for one-to-one conversation with someone in HR or coach to really help them think through for what they need to be successful at for the next 6 months or a year. What does this data suggest to them about the step-ups they can make? For some, it might be on an aspect that they're very highly rated on already compared to their peers, but really they could raise their game on it and be even more effective, and that might be more useful than solving something that they were scored more low on. So I would just encourage whatever tools you use, whatever process you use, make time for that individual reflection, commitment, and support.
Okay, we have a really great question that I'm going to try to dissect into its most core components. So bear with me for a second, Pam, because I'm going to look at this while I'm asking you. So oftentimes, the comment has been made that oftentimes senior executives are hired to really be a great senior unit lead or business lead for their department, and not necessarily hired to be the kind of executive team member who can really drive the team to its larger perspective sort of goals. And so sometimes this gap exists between the fact that they're great at being a business department head leader, but maybe not as good as participating in the senior team activities and driving the type of change and things that need to happen at that level within the organization. So how do you manage that gap? They're great at managing their team and possibly managing down, but maybe not at being a member of this higher level executive team that is responsible for, the leadership of the company as a whole.
That's a great question, Jennifer, and thank you to the people who brought it up, because it happens so frequently, doesn't it? And whether you're grooming people from the inside or you're hiring just that critical ace marketer or technical lead or whatever it is, people do tend to be hired first for function and then only secondarily for leadership team. And it's something I say to you about clients who complain that their employees don't have the attitude that they're looking for. And so, did you hire for that? No, we hired for people who had functional competence. Well, if you don't hire for attitude, don't expect to get it as a freebie. And if you don't hire for executive leadership competence, don't expect to get it as a freebie. Now, in this case, what often works is to invest in succession planning, not to necessarily hire out, let that person go because they don't yet have an enterprise leadership perspective. Few people start their organizational careers thinking enterprise-wide, although some do. This really is an opportunity to work the succession planning processes in your organization. Figure out who are some of the potential overall leaders and get them involved early in initiatives that encourage them to take a cross-functional and enterprise perspective. Get them involved with partners, get them involved with customers. Have them have that well-rounded experience, so by the time that they really need to step up, they can. And finally, if you have somebody who's a real ace in that role and you don't want to lose them, but they just don't want to step up to taking that full leadership perspective, then what's suggested in that book I referenced from the Hager Senior Leadership Team is just to invite them not to be on the executive team. And that's fine, we'll get it represented some other way. But really, when we're sitting around making enterprise level decisions, we need people who are thinking about those things.
Fantastic. Well, it looks like we are really coming to a close. So Pam, I want to thank you for joining us today and for speaking about this topic. You've drummed up a lot of questions here. We've tried to answer as many as we can and consolidate them. I'd also like to thank the members of our audience for attending and asking so many of those excellent questions. If you do have additional questions or would like to learn more about TPT, you can contact us at our website at tpt.com or find us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Thanks again, and hope you all have a great, fantastic day.